Hello and welcome to the first episode of Co-Political. This is the UK's newest political podcast run by me, Hayden Cutler, and you.
Me, October Smith, Youth Councillor.
So, we're delighted to be bringing you this podcast, and we thought for the first episode, and the first episode of our general election special, where we'll be releasing episodes every day in the run-up to the general election, we thought we'd go over how the campaign so far has been, what each party has done, where the gaffes have come from, and who's ultimately in the lead. So, first let's start on the 22nd of May. Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, stood outside number 10 with a little podium, no plaque, remember, we noticed that, in the pouring rain and declared a general election. Of course, this came after much speculation, after multiple ministers were called back from overseas trips, including David Cameron from Albania. So it wasn't the most surprising thing, but it was unexpected before the day. Now, October, any comments?
Yeah, because I think a lot of our friend group were watching that. I think it's important to mention just how wrong it went. I think it's quite, crucial to touch on that because, yes, it was pouring rain and notably Steve Bray was playing Things Can Only Get Better through loudspeakers.
And I think it wasn't only that, it was quite poor timing as well, because I think he angered a lot of both his party and his activist base by suddenly announcing a July election after mainly targeting the second half of the year, as these were people that, they have family and stuff, they have lives, they're planning on, going on some holidays and things, and suddenly they're expected to give their lives up for the general election. So I think it was quite the miscalculation. I can see why he did it, as that was the same day that I believe inflation was down to 2%. So I can see how he thought things wouldn't improve from here, so delaying it would be a mistake, as you're just sort of increasing the anger. But I think that sort of backfired on him with his promises of an election in the second half of the year. And yes.
Yeah.
So.
Well, another point that does affect voters, actually, a lot of people are going to be moving around, especially students, around July. So it's a very small chance it could be a bit of a ploy to, kind of.
Well, if it was a ploy to remove the younger vote, that might have backfired as well, as I saw research. I can't remember from which think tank, but there was research showing that uni students voting in their hometowns as opposed to their uni towns could actually cost the Tories 4 safe seats, because they've got that high proportion of that voting bloc is mostly going to be progressive left wing, so they're probably going to vote Labour this election, because there is so many people in those Tory safe seats voting Labour, it could actually cost them seats. So, well, you might be right. I'm not saying a bit conspiratorial, but there's a chance.
There is a
chance. It could cost them.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as I'm sure we will discuss later, the Conservative Party's campaign, it's not going too swimmingly.
Well, on that point, should we move to the 23rd? That's yours.
Indeed, the 23rd of May, the day after the announcement of the Jenny Leck. Jeremy Corbyn, prior leader of the Labour Party, is expected to run as an independent candidate from his seat in Islington North, which is confirmed on the day after. Nigel Farage rules out running as an MP for his party, Reform UK, which he is the founder and honorary president of. And Sunak says asylum seekers will only be sent to Rwanda, quote-unquote, if I'm re-elected, confirming none will go before. Do you have any thoughts, Mr. Cutler?
I think the interesting one is the Nigel Farage one, because he later switched it around in a sort of move to usurp Richard Tice, because he was the honorary president before and Richard Tice was the leader.
Yes,
but
indeed.
Suddenly he comes out later, and we will cover that later, so I'm going to try and make my point short. He usurps Richard Tice, becomes leader and takes over a seat, because the thing to know about Reform UK is it's registered as a limited company, which means there's no inner party democracy, which means since he owns the company, he can do that. It is within his right, because Reform UK, notably, if you join as a member of Reform UK, you don't get the same rights as being a member of other party, because other parties are set up differently, whereas Reform UK is set up as a company. But I won't labour on that point for too long, because we will come back to it later.
Talking of Labour, with Jeremy Corbyn, I think that's a whole interesting thing in itself.
It is interesting, yeah. If you look at Salvation recently did constituency polling
I've seen that.
of his seat Islington North, and it's interesting because his campaign thought he was very popular in the seat, and it wasn't Labour that was popular, but the polling revealed that actually Labour is, I can't remember how many points, but some points above him.
What was I about to
Which
ask?
shows, like, I think he overestimated how much his constituents like him for him rather than voting for him because it was a Labour safe seat. So I think there was a miscalculation by the campaign there because, of course, he was kicked out from the Labour Party, so he couldn't run as a Labour MP. But was it right for him to run as an independent? Alas, alack, we move on.
Yes.
Michael Gove, 24th of May, Michael Gove, Housing Minister, well, previous Housing Minister,
I definitely knew that was his job.
announces he will not run as an MP for a seat in Surrey Heath, which leads on to the number of current MPs standing down reaching 119, beating the 117 MPs who stood down in the 1997 election before Tony Blair's landslide. However, doesn't beat the record for the most MPs standing down. That was 2010 with 149.
I remember.
Starmer also agrees to TV debates with Sunak. The Tories want 6 debates, but Labour only commit to 2. Unfortunately, other parties aren't involved. Here at Co-Political, we are small party advocates, wahey. And finally, Sunak said he was disappointed his smoking ban won't become law. Starmer said Scotland is central to the mission of a Labour government, and the Lib Dems pledge 8,000 new GPs. Any thoughts?
Well, it's funny you mentioned the Tony Blair landslide because, again, with a lot of speculation going on, it is likely that is going to be mimicked, if not amplified, this time.
Yes. The question, I don't think the question at this point is whether Labour will get a landslide. The question is how many seats will the Tories lose.
Yes, certainly. And
yeah.
I'm just excited to see the results generally.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting election no matter what, not just because we're all going to be watching whether the Conservative Party, as we know it, disappears off the face of the earth, which is a genuine possibility.
Oh, certainly.
It's also going to be the gains made by smaller parties, especially notably the Liberal Democrats, who will, at the very least, suggested by polling, triple their seat count and may even become official opposition, but also parties like the Green Party, who are expecting to at least get a second seat, or maybe even up to 4 if you see what's happening in Waveney Valley and other places. And also the likes of Reform UK. I mean, they are expected to make quite the grand splash into the UK political scene. It seems people are seeming to like them. I think their only issue is not their ability to attract voters, but their ability to centralise their campaigning and winnable seats.
I can see a lot more issues than just that, but that's for another day.
Well, the issues with why they're not going to win seats is because they don't have the activist base, so they're not going around where they can win, targeting seats, etc., like the Lib Dems do, like the Green Party do. So that's their issue with why they won't win as many seats as they could, given they're on similar predicted vote share to the Liberal Democrats. Indeed. Well, actually, back to you for the 25th of May.
Okay, nothing further to say, that's fine. The 25th of May. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says he wants to cut national insurance, but Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves commits to not playing fast and loose with public money. General Secretary of Unite Union says Labour's plan for workers, quote-unquote, had more holes in it than Swiss cheese, but Starmer says it would be, quote-unquote, the biggest levelling up of working people's rights in a generation. Scottish parties hit the campaign trail, but First Minister John Swinney denies his campaign will be overshadowed by his handling of the Michael Matheson Bences scandal, threatened to overshadow his campaign. Any points?
Well, just for our listeners' benefit, the Michael Matheson expenses scandal, if I'm not mistaken, is where a minister or frontbencher within the Scottish government, run by the SNP, brought his parliamentary iPad, like their issue iPads by the Scottish Parliament, for a holiday with his kids in Morocco, I believe. I can't exactly remember. He brought his iPad on holiday, turned on data roaming, and it cost a bunch of money to the taxpayer because data roaming is expensive. His party did not back a ban for him. They were just like, it was an honest mistake. He's paid it back. Fine. But that is what happened over the Michael Mattison expenses scandal. I'm just going to check and verify I haven't absolutely lied to our listeners, because this is unscripted. I didn't realise I would be going into such detail on that, but alas,
yes. Well,
that is what we do.
While we're on that, Hayden, how do you feel about, said minister taking his iPad? What do you think? Do you think the party went around it well?
To be honest, it's Scottish politics. I have very few opinions on Scottish politics.
Valid.
There have been many scandals throughout this election campaign, and this is one of the few that I could see as being a genuine mistake. I'm not that educated on the matter. Alas, that is what we do.
Yeah,
that is what we do.
Exactly.
Actually, no. One point I do want to cover was that the General Secretary of the Unite Union actually coming out against Labour's plan for workers. I think it's interesting because Labour is notably the party of the working people, and previously they leaned heavily on union support. But I think Starmer, I was talking to this about you in private, the fact that Labour has moved to the centre in order to win, sort of not betraying their original supporters, but sort of moving away from the base that got them up into power originally, and that base included the unions. I think Starmer's moving more towards a more centrist Labour Party, and I think it's interesting how we're seeing this great shift in British politics where Labour becomes the centrist party, the Conservatives move ever more right, and the Liberal Democrats sort of swap with Labour to become the new progressive party. It is very interesting though, because they've previously been a very union heavy party, and that had been a Conservative attack line. Labour's funded by the unions, but they're moving away from that point, and now I think most unions are backing the Labour Party, but Unite is coming out against them, and I think that does show this big ideological shift for Labour.
Yeah, definitely, and it's quite bizarre to watch. And as said, Labour is moving more to the centre. It's certainly interesting. It is certainly quite bizarre to see.
I don't think anyone expected it, put it that way, but alas, alack, that is what Starmer brings us. But shall we move on to the 26th?
Yes.
So, on the 26th of May, the Tories announced plans to bring back national service, good old Nashy Serve, with 18-year-olds able to apply to a full-time military placement or to volunteer one weekend a month. And Rachel Reeves ruled out increasing income tax or national insurance, but some spending cuts were not ruled out under a Labour government.
Oh, Nashy Serves. Well,
national service.
No one liked that, frankly.
The interesting thing about national service is people have been treating it as sort of go to the army or face intense punishment. Volunteering one weekend a month, which is what's proposed by the plans, isn't that bad. But the problem is, one, the media and press around it have been terrible.
They have.
Terrible. They haven't advertised their plans well. And secondly, they haven't considered young people who don't even have one weekend a month. Say they're a young carer and they've got, dependents to look after, and that one week in the month is the only free time they have. Under the Conservatives' plans, that person will not get that free time. Off you go to volunteering. Sure, me, I'm a homebody, I sit around all day, that's why I have time to do things like this.
Exactly.
But I already volunteer one weekend a month, that's not an issue for me. It would be people like that who are most affected. I think that was the main issue with the Conservatives' plans. They didn't consider the not lower down in society, but the people who would be more affected.
Yes.
If you get what I mean.
And I've been on a number of rants about how I feel about this policy, which in reality there's no way it's going to be put into place now.
No, because the Conservatives won't get into government, and Labour are firmly against national service. I mean,
yes.
A lot of their advertising focus to young people is vote Labour or you'll go to war. So if they do come into government and are actually national service sounds like a pretty good idea, then they will basically be turning their back to the young people who they said, this is what you vote to get away from national service. I don't see any sort of
Yeah,
future where that
certainly.
becomes a thing. Unless we get thrown into the, I don't know, war with Russia, then we'll probably
Yes.
need it. But
Well, let's think hopefully. But yeah,
yeah,
I'm not a fan of said policy. I don't think a lot of young folks are, especially with the fact that, let me say that again, that was slurred, especially with the fact that only the military placement option is a paid one.
yeah,
It's just bizarre. I
it's
mean,
not it's not volunteering at that point. It's just a
exactly.
forced work,
Both options
and
are not volunteering. They are
yeah,
mandatory, which, people need a
but
choice.
yeah, and from the youth work that I've done, and I'm sure the youth work we've both done. If you don't know, if you haven't watched the trailer, we're both youth activists. We've done youth work
Yes,
before.
indeed.
Anyway, back to the point I was making. Young people won't engage with things they're forced to do. If you give them options and they're able to pick things they want to do, then they'll genuinely engage with the task they've been given. But if you just force them into something, then they won't engage with it, and I think it will end up worse for both the army because they've got a bunch of volunteers that just like, this is a neat paycheck, I don't really care,
Mm.
and it will be bad for the third sector because they got a bunch of kids they don't know how to handle because they don't really want to be there.
Yes, exactly. It's I don't think you can do good on any front. Anyway, I've got nothing to say on French briefs,
27th,
so shall we move on? Is that
27th, that's yours.
That's my one. Okay, so the 27th of May, Labour win the signed backing, should we say, of 121 founders, CEOs, and former leaders of many a business in this country. Conservative MP Lucy Allen for Telford is suspended from the party, I assume losing her whip, after backing the Reform candidate for her seat. As she says, he, quote unquote, is genuinely the best person for the job. She was stepping down, anyway, to be replaced by Hannah Campbell. Former West Midlands Mayor Andy Street, Conservative, rules out running as an MP again, which is rather a common theme, as priorly discussed. And Scottish Lib Dems pledged to fix dental deserts as their first flagship policy. Anything to say?
Well, I think it's interesting that Labour won the backing of 120-ish business
Over,
people
yeah.
because, as we were talking earlier, Labour used to be the party of the worker, the party of the union. But Starmer coming out after Corbyn, he saw how terribly, and I wouldn't say terribly, because actually Corbyn's vote share was similar to Starmer's vote share. It's just because the Conservatives have been decimated to such a degree that it's actually
Exactly.
reasonable that Starmer wins.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting that to achieve such a thing, they've moved away from being the party of the working people, for the many and not for the few, and that thing, and they moved towards the party of business. And I think
Yeah.
there's a common theme around the world when parties come closer to government. They tend to move towards the centre. I mean,
Yeah.
the example I can think of is in Finland, as we saw
Of course.
in the most recent parliamentary elections in Finland, the far-right Finns party managed to enter a governing coalition. But as time went on, as you're in government, you move closer to the centre as you realise those more not extremist, but further out ideas that would only work in an ideal society, or your ideal society, aren't practical for government. So I think, was it inevitable that Labour would move towards the centre? I mean, after Jeremy Corbyn's run as leader,
Most like.
it was more probable than not, as, Jeremy Corbyn, he did have a terrible performance at the 2019 general election, whether you agree or disagree with his
Campaign.
ideals.
Excuse me.
And and the Tories campaign was much better then, so I think it was inevitable Labour would try and take voters from the Conservatives, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, politics is all about changing minds and getting what you want.
Yeah.
And it's also about compromise. But it's interesting to note the shift they've had over a relatively short period of time.
It has been bizarre. I'll make a very quick point because we do need to shift this along.
Yes.
MP Lucy Allen backing another candidate. That's rather bizarre. I don't know how I feel about losing the whip over it. I going to
I
be
don't
honest.
think she lost the whip. I think she actually.
She was
This might have been
suspended.
before This might have been before Parliament was dissolved. So she might
Yes,
have
it
lost the
was.
whip, or she might have just been plainly kicked out of the party. So
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I don't really know the difference, but I'll look that up afterwards.
it's the one's in Parliament, one's out of Parliament.
I definitely knew that.
Anyway, alas,
Shall we
we move
move
on.
along?
28th of May. Angela Rayner, Labour deputy leader,
Yes.
faces no police action after an investigation into the sale of her former house in Stockport, including over whether she had paid the right taxes. Diane Abbott is readmitted as a Labour MP after a suspension in April 2023 for saying that Jewish, Irish, and traveller people do not face racism, quote unquote, all their lives, with Labour originally aiming to give her a peerage in return for her standing down but failing, meaning she is now able to stand as a Labour candidate, which she confirmed her intention to do on the 2nd of June. The Tories pledged a new Triple Lock Plus pension plan, where the personal allowance for pensioners will increase at least 2.5% or in line with the highest earnings or inflation. The Lib Dems pledged to put environmental experts on water company boards to ensure sewage spills are taken seriously. And Ed Davey, of course, falls off a paddleboard in Windermere.
The fun begins.
The fun begins. That's why I noted it down. This is when the fun begins.
Good. Yeah.
And finally, former Plaid Cymru MP Jonathan Edwards for Carmarthen East and Dunfermline. I might be butchering the pronunciation. Sorry, my Welsh viewers, including my father, who accepted a police caution for assaulting his wife, announces he will not rerun after considering to run against his party.
Crikey.
Any thoughts?
Angela Rayner, I'm quite happy she got cleared up with that because, frankly, a lot of people in government and in power have done much worse in terms of tax.
I do think it was interesting how that was a scandal because I can't remember exactly, but I think there was more to the story, but I think it was mainly perpetuated as an alternative to the scandals the Conservative faced back when the campaign was originally filed. I mean, the Conservative MP who filed the scandals actually went on TV, and when asked what specifically the claim was about, he was unable to answer ultimately.
Do you know who it was?
I can't exactly remember. I don't have it in my notes.
Fair enough.
But I do think it's interesting. Like, were there issues at play? Possibly. Could it have been a genuine complaint? Possibly. But also,
I don't think so.
How much substance was it to there? And I think compared to some of the other scandals, which we will come on to, e.g. the betting scandal we're currently embroiled in right now, there was certainly less substance. I do think it was interesting, though, the Diane Abbott controversy, because she definitely said controversial things in her opinion letter to the Observer, and I do think it's interesting how much there was a push to readmit her. Labour objectively didn't handle it that well.
No, the peerage, that was, I would say that was almost bribery.
That's terrible handling of it.
Bizarre? Sorry, that's the word. That was rather bizarre
to
watch.
Labour should have been more upfront, saying if you wanted to kick her out, because the things she said in the Observer newspaper were actually
wild.
They were distasteful comments at the least, and I think
it's better wording than I
especially. Yeah, I think Labour as a party have moved away from sort of the Diane Abbott wing, from that left wing more realistic view, and we have seen other more left wing candidates being deselected. If Labour wanted to remove her, they should have been more upfront, but alas, they weren't. And the interesting thing to note is this was the point at which her whip was reinstated. This was like halfway through this year, but the investigation actually concluded in December last year. So it just shows a bit of issues with Labour on the communication on that point.
Okay, don't know anything about Triple Lock. I don't really care. Lib Dems. Ed Davey.
The stunts. Ed Davey has been notable for his stunts. They're quite the good tactic for getting in the news cycle, actually, considering
Most certainly.
They don't usually get much coverage.
The Lib Dems are quite quiet in terms of news coverage,
Yes, I think the press establishments don't really pay much attention to them, especially as they were knocked to the fourth party last election. I think that's why they're aiming to get third party at least. Yes, SNP were before them.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think they're aiming to get third party above the SNP precisely because then they'll get more rights in the House of Commons, and especially the BBC will have to pay more attention to them. But I think the stunts are a very interesting way of breaking into the news cycle because it's twofold. One, it provides journalists an interesting thing to cover, and they're going to take it hook, line, and sinker, and it gives them the platform to present policy. And two, it presents their leader as a more human and more personable than the other leaders because there have been complaints from both sides that both Sunak and Starmer are very robotic, just statesmen, typical politicians.
Some of the impressions that some people have given of both leaders are quite funny because they are very robotic.
It gives them a platform to almost be like, look at our party leader. He's he's one of us.
Exactly.
And he's a nice old man. And I think some people have said it makes it hard for the Lib Dems to be taken seriously. But as a third party, I think that's not as much of an issue.
No, exactly.
Because they are using the events to platform serious policy proposals like this one we covered. It was said, they were talking about sewage spillage and water companies and things like that. So it does give them that platform. It's just breaking into the news cycle.
It's certainly not the wanted policy of Count Bimface pushing water bosses into the River Thames, but
exactly,
it is still very fun.
There's some distance. Anyway, the 29th, that's yours.
The 29th of May, Keir Starmer denies Diane Abbott was barred from standing for Labour as a Labour candidate. However, the party suspends MP Lloyd Russell Moyle for Brighton Kempton. I'm not actually quite sure.
Kemptown, I think.
Hopefully, over a complaint about behaviour, which we'll touch on because I think we both know Lloyd Russell Moyle. Junior doctors with the British Medical Association declare a 5-day strike for the 27th of June, a week before the election, which is actually tomorrow, if they're still going ahead with that.
I believe they are.
Okay. Labour promises to hit an 18-week NHS treatment target for most patients in England within 5 years, and the Conservatives pledge to scrap rip-off degrees, quote-unquote, to help fund 100,000 apprenticeships per year, with the degrees being determined based on dropout rates, job progression, and future earnings potential. I'd like to immediately touch on the degrees and the Mickey Mouse degree fiasco before we go on to anything else, because I think that's quite bizarre, especially since I'm about to go to uni in a few months. I'm doing a music degree, and that's not always seen as high earning without quite a lot of luck. I do think go on.
I think the proposals are interesting. Again, I think it's an issue where people aren't buying it, one, because they don't like the policy, and two, because their marketing around it has been quite bad. I mean,
certainly.
They just say rip-off degrees. I do think it's interesting how they mention how they would determine it, but that hasn't been discussed in the marketing. So it is a failure of their press department, again. I do think educational reform is very interesting because I think university, it's my personal belief that one, there should be less people going to university, but two, university shouldn't also be required. Like, I should be able to do an apprenticeship or do a more basic course and enter work, especially for entry level jobs.
You can.
So I think educational reform is interesting.
Yeah.
I just think they're going about it in all the wrong ways.
Well, you don't need to go to uni just to cut in. You don't need to go to uni to do an apprenticeship.
But for most jobs, you need a degree out of it.
You do have a point.
And that results in the graduate tax that is student loans.
Yes.
So I think it is, we should do a German-style system where only for the most top jobs you go to uni, lower jobs you go to college. And the German education system I have way more criticisms about, but this is one thing they do right.
Fair enough.
The top jobs you go to uni, but the other jobs, you don't need a uni degree to get in.
Yeah.
So it sort of levels out the playing field because most people aren't burdened with student loans at that point. And Germany has free uni anyway, so they don't have that problem. But it will make things easier.
Yes, certainly. Anyway, are there any other points you want to touch on? Lloyd Russell Moyle, because we both know him somewhat even. I was in a room with him for an APPG a while ago.
Shocking.
I actually didn't know it was him until afterwards, because it was him and Joe Gideon MP running it. Jo Gideon, she is
Yeah.
was a Conservative MP.
Well, was now.
Yes,
There are
exactly.
no MPs until the general election has concluded.
Exactly that. But yeah, I'm actually not sure what the complaint was about.
They haven't specified what the complaint was about. I
Yeah,
think my opinion on the matter, because Lloyd Rossomore, some of you may know, I did a campaign to sort of bring back the British Youth Council and get
Yep.
UK Youth Parliament up and running again after the British Youth Council went bankrupt.
Yes, you're known
And
for that.
Lloyd was a great help in that. It's very interesting because he claimed that the behaviour complaint was over some very old behaviour. I believe he said 8 years old. So how vexatious it was up for debate. Of course, we don't know
Yes,
the
that's
nature of the complaint.
yeah.
We don't know how much truth there is. We don't know the outcome of the investigation.
Yeah, so maybe
it
not
might
too
just
much for us to say.
there's not too
Yeah.
much for us to say, but you wanted to make note of it, so we have
Yeah.
made note of
I
it.
think,
So
there's a whole
my verdict will be based on the outcome of the complaint investigation and the nature of the complaint.
certainly, and it's a whole other debate. The old behaviour, does it still count? Which we will not be having today. So yeah,
That is not for us to have on the
No.
podcast. We are already 35
we
minutes
are.
in. Stick to the topics at hand.
It's an interesting fiasco. Anyway, shall we move on to the next day?
Yes, that is the 30th of May.
Indeed.
So the Green Party, this is the Green Party of England and Wales, not the Scottish Green Party, claim that only they can quote-unquote push Labour for greater climate action as they launch their campaign, setting a target of at least 4 MPs, up from their current 1 MP. Labour, Tories and the Lib Dems rule out raising value-added tax if they win the election, but both Labour and the Conservative Party confirm they will keep income tax thresholds frozen until 2028, effectively a tax increase due to pay inflation pushing people into higher tax brackets.
Crikey.
And finally, Farage rules out reform, striking a deal with the Conservative Party, and the party pledges a tax on businesses employing overseas workers. Any thoughts?
Well, that last point, reform striking a deal with the Tories, I think that's interesting considering the current affairs going on with them. Because I believe
I do think it's more likely that the Tories will strike a deal with reform the next election, especially as Labour takes over their previous position as being a more moderate party. As they push further right, I think they're going to want to take more voters from reform, but it might actually benefit them electorally to partner up with them, as they'll have access to that reform voter base, and it will benefit reform as the Conservative Party are much better, well, questionable at this election, but
Yes,
have
certainly.
that experience deploying activists, getting target seats up and running.
Yeah, they have standing.
And maintaining safe seats.
They do.
They have standing and they have experience.
Reform
So I think
maybe
they
can't have that same title.
they don't have experience,
No.
and they don't. I'm not going to say they don't know how to campaign.
But maybe
I'm
not
going
in
to
the
say that
depths.
they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know how to target their campaign where they can win seats, which is limiting their progress this election.
Precisely. Anyway, are we ready to move on to the next day? Anything else?
Yes, you can combine 31st, there was nothing, so
Oh,
October
damn.
straight onto the 1st of
I was going
June.
to make a funny. I was going to, we've got a massive one. This is going to take on the next 20 minutes. 31st of May. Nothing of note. A boring day in the world of politics. That does not happen.
Shocking.
Do you want me to do the 1st of June as well?
Sure, why
Alright,
not?
I'm taking the even. No, I'm not. I can count, I promise. 1st of June. Labour pledges to give big businesses greater flexibility over how they spend government money ring-fenced for apprenticeships, allowing them to use up to 50% of the cash to either fund apprenticeships or to train existing staff. Tories pledged... No, I'm going to restart that point. The Tories pledged to build 100 new GP surgeries in England and to boost appointments by allowing pharmacies to provide more treatments without first having to see a GP. And the Lib Dems pledged to make 10 Premier League games per season free to watch on TV. I'll jump into an immediate point with the promise to build new GP surgeries. I believe at the beginning of some point or other, with the Conservatives, there was a promise to build like 40 new hospitals. That fell
That
through.
was the 2019 general
I
election.
thought
So it does. I think all the pledges are very interesting because it's the debate on can people trust politicians,
Yes, which I
especially
think
the Conservative Party after 13 years or
14
something like that
years.
of government,
Yeah.
14 years of government
think-
to deliver
yeah.
on their promises. And I think that's why many voters have moved to Labour, because while they may enjoy the Conservative Party manifesto, they may believe that they haven't inspired enough change
No,
over,
certainly.
because that's the difficulty being an incumbent for this long. Usually at the start of being an incumbent, the first election you fight, it's easier to win, but 14 years down the line it's harder because people want change, because people think they can't trust you anymore.
No.
So I think
Yeah,
that is one of the issues,
Certainly.
many issues facing the Conservative Party. That's undeniable, even the Tories won't deny
No,
that.
they're not.
That is one of them.
Yes, public trust is on the whole waning in politicians,
Yeah.
and
That applies to all parties
certainly.
as well. I don't think any party doesn't have some
No,
level of
definitely.
distrust from the general public.
exactly.
Even Starmer, our future Prime Minister, I believe, has
Yes.
a negative approval rating. And while it's way smaller than Sunak's, it's still something.
It's still notable.
Might be not true, but that's as much as I can remember.
Yes, quite possibly. Lib Dems.
Lib Dems,
I'm a fan of
10
this
Premier
policy.
League games per season, free to watch on TV. I do think it's interesting how Labour and Tories, their policy pledges are very serious, and the Lib Dems come in with 10 Premier League games. They do have an interesting point.
Yeah, I think because
I'm not going to deny that, but I do think it's interesting that that's what they're focusing on. Because their manifesto, I must clarify, I have read through the manifestos, and the Lib Dems do have similar sort of, at least, tone of policy. Like, they're not a joke party by any stretch of the means, but they could be targeting the youth vote, which will be very powerful with this election, as they think young people are more incensed to vote than ever. So I think they could be going after the youth, and people may point out the coalition and how they sort of went back on young people with the tuition fees. However, I think it's been long enough since that point where people are starting to forget about that, and that's not as much of the point. Sure, Ed Davey was in the coalition government, but I think it's clear to most people that the party has changed since that point. So I think they are going after that youth vote that they lost in 2010, 2015.
yes, indeed. And I do have a couple points with the Lib Dems policy announcement for this. I think generally the public, and it's not even just this country, we've had a lack of third spaces and a lack of, cheap or free entertainment. So I think that's quite a rocking policy. And again, as you said, getting the youth vote back, it is likely aiming for that. And I'll shill this now. I believe it's too late to register to vote, but make sure you go out and vote on the 4th of July.
Make sure you go out and vote. And today, if you're listening to this podcast episode on the day it was released, today is the last day to apply for a voter authority certificate if you do not have photo ID to vote.
Yes, photo ID is a must. Bring it.
Pause this episode right now. If you're over 18 and registered to vote, pause this episode right now. Go downstairs, dig out your passport, driver's license, whatever. Check it's valid. It can be expired, but it must look like you. And if your name is different, it doesn't look like you, or you do not have valid photo ID, then right now, gov.uk, there's a little search box, type in voter authority certificate, apply for one. You have until 5 p.m. Go check now. Pause this podcast, chuck your phone across the room in a panic, run downstairs, do whatever you need. Find that photo ID and check.
Yes, get it done.
And if it's not valid, go apply right now.
Your vote counts.
That's your public service announcement from the Co-Political podcast.
Yes.
But shall we move on?
Yes. I have nothing more to say on the 1st of June.
2nd of June. The Labour promises to cut net migration by reducing the need for overseas workers through improving the training of British workers, but does not set a target to reduce migration by. And police to begin to review claims that Conservative candidate Robert Largan for High Peak in Derbyshire committed electoral fraud after social media posts reading Labour for Largan and Reform for Robert are posted in the respective parties' colours on his social media. Any thoughts?
Yes.
A quick one I'll make is the net migration point for Labour. Again, shows they're moving to the centre, shows they're trying to get more votes from the Conservatives, but we covered that point earlier, so I won't labour it on here. Haha, funny pun.
Oh, good one. Very quick
You have
point
any points?
on the second one. Yes, that Robert Lagan situation.
I remember seeing that in my
was
timeline.
bizarre.
Quite funny.
Yeah.
I think his idea was to say, was as many candidates are doing this election. I don't know if you've got Tory election
I
leaflets
have.
through the
I've
post.
got
They
one
don't
through
use the blue anymore.
No, they are ashamed of the blue, which is bogus.
They tend to stick to not using their party branding, and I think it was a similar move saying, don't focus on me being the Tory candidate, focus on me being a candidate for the local area.
Yeah.
And the point he was trying to make was that, Labour voters are going to vote for him because they think he's such a great local champion, and Reform voters are going to vote for him because he's such a great local champion. Very clearly backfired.
Yes, and
But
yeah.
it does show Conservatives are losing their identity almost, and the identity has been not poisoned, but tainted by the past 14 years they've had in government, even for the Conservative Party themselves.
Exactly, and some people may say that fall-off is justified.
Some people may say, especially Labour, will claim that fall-off is justified, but it's interesting. What are your thoughts, folks? Let us know. Do you think parties should be able to abandon their brand and make it look like they're independent candidates, or do you think parties should be more clear about who they are? Let us know on social media. Tag us at CoPolitical, #listen to CoPolitical, social promo crap.
Yes. Before we move on to the next day, I'd like to point out I find a lot of the memes that are going around currently painting Rishi Sunak as, this cool independent local candidate. I find them quite funny.
Yeah, it does seem interesting. The Prime Minister and the leader of the Conservative Party isn't even advertising himself using the Conservative brand. I mean, at the local election, it appeared as if they were the Green Party, and now it appears as if they're the Beige Party. I'm sure they have the Conservative logo on their leaflets, but if you're having a cursory read over, you can skip that.
It is rather comical and rather interesting.
Shall we move on?
Let's. What are we on? Are we on the 3rd of June? 3rd of June. Yes. Starmer sets out Labour's defence plans, saying security comes first, quote unquote, and confirming he is prepared to use nuclear weapons. Here we are, back with Nigel Farage announcing that he is the candidate for reform in Clacton and usurps Richard Tice as party leader for the next 5 years. The Conservatives pledged to rewrite the Equality Act to include transgender people from...
Exclude, not include.
Yes, exclude. Naturally, dare I say. To exclude transgender people from claiming the rights that align with their gender identity. And the Lib Dems, back at it again, photobomb the PM while he's at a campaign event in Henley-on-Thames with a boat. Where do you want to touch on first?
Lib Dems back with their classic act. I believe Daisy Cooper, deputy leader of the Lib Dems, you might have seen her in some of the 7-way debates. She said that Rishi Sunak was simply in town, managed to find one of her supporters, because I believe that might have been in her constituency. Might be completely wrong, but she was in the area. Rishi was in the area. She found a Lib Dem supporter with a boat. They got on a boat. Rishi happened to be sitting behind a river, facing away from it, and Lib Dems come straight on past.
Yes. She's a member for St Albans. I don't know if that's anywhere near...
St Albans, I don't know if that's in Henley-on-Thames, but she is the... Daisy Cooper, Lib Dem candidate for St Albans. You can find information about the other candidates available online.
Indeed.
Doing a BBC disclosure.
It was rather funny to watch that unfold. Again, the memes have been pumping out of the Lib Dems campaign, of all of this. It's certainly entertaining.
If it gets the media coverage, I think they would think it's working.
Indeed.
Any other points?
Yes, the Conservative pledged to rewrite the Equality Act. Now...
Of course.
I'm not a fan.
I will first say that the co-political podcast is in favour of trans rights.
Oh, obviously.
For all.
I'm transgender.
If you disagree, then why are you listening to us? October, case in point.
Yes, I'm transgender myself, obviously. I've been out since I was rather young. It's bizarre seeing how anti-LGBT politics and the world in general is moving.
Yeah,
it's very, very
and I do
bizarre.
think And the Conservatives are very interesting because back under Theresa May in 2019, they actually were in favour of self-ID for trans
Yeah,
people. Come here, even Labour won't take that much of a progressive stance.
No.
I think the only parties that do, I think Lib Dems are, their self-ID might be in their manifesto. They definitely
I
have
need to reread. Yes.
lots of pro-trans things in there, and I think the Greens might be in favour of self-ID. I don't have it in my
I
notes.
assume so.
Of course, as always, make sure you read the manifestos yourself so you can get a wide range of opinions and coverage on all sorts of issues. But alas, on that one issue, I believe Lib Dems and Greens tend to be more pro-trans, Labour, Conservatives and Reform tend to be more anti-trans.
Yes. Talking of reform, yes, here is the oh holy day that Nigel Farage usurped Richard Tice, non-democratic.
And I believe the Clacton is the constituency currently polled under MRP polling to get the highest vote share for reform. So it seems like quite a smart move to run there. I believe Tice is in Boston and Skegness. He's probably going to get it. And Lee Anderson in Nashville is probably going to get it. So that's 3 seats they could be looking at getting. Interestingly, the previous candidate for Clacton, I can't remember his name, is now running as an independent against reform. So take that for what you will.
Crikey, yeah, that sums up everything I have to say.
4th of June?
4th of June, let's move on.
That's mine.
Indeedly.
The first TV debate goes live on ITV with Starmer and Sunak head-to-head. Alas, this is not the debates episode.
No.
That's a separate affair. So, moving on. 2 people are arrested after a milkshake is thrown at Nigel Farage during his campaign launch in Clacton. Lovely. Moving on, 5th of June.
Yes, 5th of June. Let me try that again. The 5th of June. The Conservative Party chairman Richard Holden faces backlash after being selected at the last second, for the safe seat of Basildon and I actually don't know how to say. Billericay, that's one. For Basildon and Billericay. Despite local party officials' objections, the Lib Dem leader Ed Davey was fined for doing 73 miles per hour in a 60 miles per hour zone on the M1, with him saying he apologises for missing a temporary speed limit.
Back with the stunts.
Yes.
They've gone too far.
Inadvertent stunt, clearly. The Welsh First Minister, Vaughan Gething of Labour, refuses to quit. Let me try that again, I slurred that. Refuses to quit despite losing a vote of no confidence in the Senate, I believe that said.
Yes.
In the Senate, called over donations made to his campaign by a company owned by a man previously convicted of environmental offences. Anything to say?
I do think the vote of no confidence is an interesting one, because the only reason that would have been tied, and that would have gone to a vote of the Speaker, and the Speaker always votes against a no confidence motion. The only reason he lost that was because 2 Labour Party officials were off sick, and what usually happens is, like, the opposition would provide 2 members to be off sick, but they refused to in this instance. So I do think it's interesting how he actually lost that, and how 2 party members did not cast votes.
Yeah,
for
very interesting.
Vaughan in that instance. There is lots to be said over the Vaughan Gething scandal about him being given donations by a man who owned a company. Both the man convicted of environmental offences, and I believe the company was applying to run. I think it was something like a landfill, applying to run a landfill, and that application was given. So take that for what you will. Do your own research. This episode is not covering it, as we're already 52 minutes in.
We really are.
And we're only on the 5th of June.
We need to pick
Still
up
got
pace.
a lot to cover, so we're trying to be brief, folks. So if you're interested,
do your own research.
There is plenty to find online. But alas, should we move on to the 6th? Or any
quick
points?
note about Ed Davey. I, for one, don't really care that he was fined.
I don't think most people care about the speeding. The only reason I included it was to show that we provide criticisms of all parties on Co-Political, because we're unbiased and impartial.
Good job. Yes.
6th of June.
6th of June, yes. Go
The
on.
Union for Civil Servants files a challenge in the High Court against the Rwanda plan, which is the plan to send migrants, illegal migrants to Rwanda, after complaining that it means some members can be made to break the law, as ministers may be able to instruct them to ignore rulings by the European Court of Human Rights under the plans. The Tory party receives criticism for accepting donations from Frank Hester, who was accused of making racist comments about Labour's Diane Abbott. Labour drops long-standing legal action against 5 former members of staff who were accused of conspiring against Starmer's leadership. Notably, the legal action faced lots of backlash from activists within the party, as they complained it was very costly and that costs could be diverted to the general election campaign. And finally, Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross announces he will stand in the general election for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East, deselecting the local pick of David Duguid. David Duguid.
Maybe?
Don't know how to pronounce that. Sorry, Scottish listeners. Whilst unwell and going back on his previous commitment of standing down as an MP to focus on his job as an MSP. Any thoughts?
I actually don't know the difference between an MP and an MSP. Is it just more focused?
MP, member of UK Parliament, MSP, member of Scottish
I
Parliament.
assumed so. Do I have any thoughts? I think Frank Hester's comments were quite vile. So
Yes, the Frank Hester controversy was actually played out long before the general election,
yes, indeed.
and he donated to the Conservative Party previously, back when they were in government and Parliament wasn't dissolved. I think most of the backlash was over the fact that despite all the controversy back then, they continued to accept donations from Frank Hester in the general election period.
yeah.
So there's your context,
Can
folks.
be condemned, I'd say. I'd like to move on fairly swiftly because we've got a bit of a beast
Fair
to
enough.
fight for the
Go on.
7th of June.
Ah, yes, 7th of June,
Yes.
7th of June. Interesting day.
Yes, Prime Minister at the time, Rishi Sunak, apologises for leaving a D-Day 80th anniversary event in France early after severe backlash and accusations of failing his duties as Prime Minister, with Starmer remaining at the event until the end. And notably, a picture amongst world leaders, David Cameron had to stand in. He looks rather bizarre, if I do say so myself.
Rather out of place. I think one of the comments made was, if someone went into a coma around like 2012 and woke up today, they thought David Cameron was still Prime Minister.
Yes, very
Anyway,
insane. Very
second,
bizarre.
moving on.
Yes, and the final point, the Greens, GPEW, I've actually...
That means Green Party of England
That's
and Wales.
one, I forgot the acronym. They block a small number of election candidates from standing after investigations into their digital footprint, adding to the 4 previously barred after a probe into anti-Semitic or extremist comments. I believe the immediate thought is going to be going to D-Day.
D-Day, yes.
Go ahead.
So, it came out later that he claimed, because he left to do an interview with ITV.
Yes, campaign work.
ITV revealed that this was the only date and time they were given for the interview. They were given no other options. It was not ITV's decision to hold it on the D-Day 80th anniversary event. Rishi claimed that the event overran. This was untrue. And also, I believe, if I'm not wrong, leaked documents revealed that the main reason Rishi did not attend the event was because because it was ran by the French government, and he saw it as, it wasn't as important because it was a French event. He did not see it as an international event. That may be wrong. I will verify as October gives his opinion.
There might be some truth in that. I think it's quite deplorable, honestly. It does show you just have no concern for the people that have fought for your country, however recently. I don't think that was a good move at all, but some speculation says that it might have been planned. A lot of these blunders in the Conservative campaign might be, political apoptosis, and I think there might be some truth in that. It is getting to the point where there are so many gaffes, surely it can't be coincidental or accidental.
Yes,
that is
I can't find...
speculation, even.
Just jumping in, I can't find any verification on the podcast, live on the podcast. We do our bit to ensure the factual accuracy of our claims.
Indeed.
There is no verification that the official reasoning was because it was a French event and not an international event. So take that for what you will.
Yes.
It is purely the opinion of the Co-Political podcast.
Indeed.
There's your disclaimer.
Anyway, shall we move on? Because we...
8th of June, Labour's
time.
Shadow Business Secretary says that income tax thresholds will remain frozen, maintaining previous Conservative policy if they win the election, with him saying it amounted to a tax rise. And the Lib Dems proposed 3 new national parks with the Chilterns, Mendips, Cotswolds and Quantocks as possible locations. Any thoughts?
Nothing on the first point. Taxes are not quite my domain. Lib Dems back at it again.
Yes, I've chucked a few Lib Dem proposals in, mainly because we need to get some more diversity in British politics away from just Labour Conservatives, Labour Conservatives. So hopefully you feel we've made an effort to include other parties. So there's a proposal from the Lib Dems.
Yes,
all party manifestos are available to read online, including Labour and the Tories. Moving on.
Before we move
9th
on,
of June, that's yours.
I just want to reiterate, it is rather enjoyable seeing the fun side of each party's campaign, notably the Lib Dems campaign. Moving swiftly on. The 9th of June, a rather small one. The Conservative Party pledged almost 730 million to expand mental health treatment in England in a bid to tackle sick note culture. I'm going to jump in immediately. I think the whole talk of sick note culture and trying to reduce people's ability to take time for their self of work is bizarre. It's a lot of money to pledge, though.
It's interesting because the Conservative people think of them as the not regressive, but conservative party.
Naturally.
So it's interesting that they do have a focus on mental health, which is seen as more of a progressive issue.
You heard it here, folks.
It could be seen as
the Conservatives are conservative. Do continue.
Thank you. My insight is brilliant.
Exactly.
Please continue to listen in. But should mental health be a progressive issue? No, it should be a cross-party issue, so it's good to see parties across the political spectrum look at mental health. Alas, the use of, because sick note culture is a direct quote from Mel Stride, I believe, who was Secretary at the Department for Work and Pensions. So, on the one hand, good that mental health is a focus in this election. On the other hand, the use of sick note culture, not really a thing. Sick note culture is actually just people caring about their mental health over, slaving away at their jobs.
Exactly, which is, or very much should be, a human right. Shall we move swiftly on?
10th of June, Lib Dems, the first party to launch their manifesto, do so on this day, but all the manifestos will receive coverage in separate episodes, so do look forward to that, folks. Ian Gribbin, the Reform candidate for Bexhill and Battle, apologised after claiming the country would be quote-unquote far better if it had taken Hitler up on his offer of neutrality instead of fighting the Nazis in World War II. And Douglas Ross announces he will resign as leader of the Scottish Conservatives after the general election, following a row over his decision to stand as an MP despite committing to standing down and focusing on his MSP role, which we covered earlier.
Minor correction, it is a row. But, straight in...
Oh, no, it's a row.
No, it's not. It's a row.
Anyway, pronunciation aside, any points?
Well, I will fight you on this. Ian Gribbin. What a bizarre thing to say.
It was, I believe, it was said in a social media post a while ago, and I believe he apologised and owned up for it, but still, who's going to claim Hitler?
Yes.
Was like... that guy. We should have listened to that dude. Who's going to claim that?
That is a bizarre
Only
thing.
Ian Gribbin would.
Exactly. Lib Dems launched their manifesto. Gotta love it. We will be covering that.
Yeah, first manifesto.
Yes.
I think the current plan is, in the run-up to the general election, in the last few days, we will cover the manifestos of each major and minor party in England and possibly Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, depending on our availability in each day, and also depending how the news cycle shapes our schedules, as if things happen, if there are controversies that need to be explained, we will be on the forefront of that.
Indeed.
So we will always update our plans on social media. Follow us at copolitical_pod on Twitter and Instagram, and at copolitical on TikTok.
You heard it.
Anyway,
we need to get the
any other comments?
Nada. Shall we move on to the
Right.
11th of June?
11th of June.
Yes.
That's
The
yours.
Conservative manifesto launch happens, which we will also be covering closer to the date of the general election. That's a word.
If current plans hold.
Yes, indeed. The Social Democratic Party launched their first manifesto in 37 years. Maybe we'll cover that? I don't know. With the party,
We'll see. Probably not, but we'll see.
With the party tracing its roots back to a group of MPs who left Labour in 1981 to form a new centrist party. And finally, Nigel Farage has objects, seemingly a takeaway cup, thrown at him, again, when on top of a bus campaigning in Barnsley. Was it a bus or the Reform Battle Bus? Do we know?
It was the Reform Battle Bus,
I figured as much.
I believe.
I'll continue this point in just a moment, just plugging in my computer. And a 28-year-old man is arrested on suspicion of public order offences. Anything to say? We'll keep this one fairly quick, I reckon.
Social Democratic Party, very interesting party because it's a splinter group from Labour, but I believe it's shifted more right over the years. But alas, alack, they are a tiny party and probably not running a candidate in your constituency. If they are, manifesto available online. We probably won't cover it. It was more thrown in there because, you know, novelty.
Yes.
There's a new party. Well, not a new party. There's an old party re-entering the political scene. There you go. I have no other points to
I
make.
have one
you
more.
have any quick
Yes,
points?
I've got one more on the Nigel Farage situation. Moving swiftly on.
Anyway, 12th of June, Tory candidate and senior aide to Rishi Sunak, Craig Williams, the candidate for Montgomery and Glender. I don't know my Welsh. Glinder, something like that. Don't know my Welsh pronunciations. Admits that the Gambling Commission are investigating a £100 bet he made on the election date 3 days before the initial official announcement. Yes, the 12th of June is the start of the betting scandal.
Yes.
Sunak says he went without lots of things as a child, including Sky TV, in an interview with ITV News. Conservative candidate Andrea Jenkins for Leeds South West defends the decision to feature Nigel Farage on an election leaflet, saying she wants to, quote-unquote, unite her party and Reform UK. And an independent candidate named Nico Omilana is registered to stand in 11 seats, including the seat of Rishi Sunak. YouTuber Nico Omilana takes credit for the stunt but does not clarify whether he illegally registered in multiple seats, or whether other people changed their name to his before running. Any thoughts?
The whole Nico Omilana situation is rather funny. That's literally all I know and care to
I
say.
think his main aim is to get more young people in politics,
I hope
and
so.
getting more young people into politics is a very just aim.
Yes.
As you know, we're young people, we like politics, of course we're going to back young people in politics.
Indeed. Sunak saying he went without Sky TV, rather insensitive, I think.
Another one of the election gaps.
Yes, once again.
The Conservative Party have been notable for. It is interesting how poorly their campaign has been run compared to previous years, because, I mean, the 2019 one under Boris Johnson was much better compared to this.
Certainly.
Theresa May 2017, there's a debate over
It was alright.
how successful that was, but I think Rishi Sunak, notable, is quite a slip in standards.
Again, there is conspiracy around it. This could be planned suicide for the party, essentially. But that is, you know.
I'm not one to entertain conspiracy
That's
theories.
fair enough.
I'll let that be your domain.
That is up
Any
to
other
date.
points?
Gambling. Gamblegate
Gambling.
begins today. That is not the official title. Please do not go around calling that. I don't want that to my name.
I call it the betting scandal.
Yes,
but,
betting
you know,
scandal.
I'm happy to add it to the leagues like Jenny Leck and Nashi Sir. We can have Gamblegate.
Great heavens, what have I done? Yeah, very bizarre. Did anything actually happen? Is he still being investigated, do we know?
I don't know on the outcome of the investigation by the Gambling Commission, but I can confirm that Craig Williams and another party parliamentary candidate that also was found to be betting on the election date have since been suspended from the Conservative Party, although that was as of very recent. So take from that what you will.
Alright, shall we
Anyway.
move on?
You've got a quick point for the 13th of June.
Oh, it's take forever. 13th of June, Labour and Plaid Cymru launch manifestos. I actually still need to read both of them, but we will be doing reviews.
We will be not reviewing. We will be
Explaining. You know what I mean.
explaining, summarising, and condensing all the parties' manifestos, or at least all the major parties in England's manifestos, for your listening pleasure. So look forward to that, folks. Should we move on? 14th
swiftly.
of June. Coming towards the end of the episode. Well, probably not. This will probably take us another 3 hours. Just joking. You know how long this will take. I don't. 14th of June, it is revealed that Labour raised over £350,000 more donations than the Conservatives in the first week of the general election campaign, who raised just under £570,000 compared to £5.7 million in 2019. And Jeremy Corbyn accuses Starmer of rewriting history after he claimed that he knew the party would lose the 2019 general election. Any thoughts?
I mean, I've seen a lot of how Labour's fundraising is going, and from certain sources I've seen in the emails, there is, I hear it is constant emails asking for donations and funding, and I feel like some of it has been a little misleading, because it's constantly like, we need this money, the Conservatives are doing really well with their fundings, which...
Yeah, the Conservatives have notably been doing quite poorly in the campaign, though Labour... It's only 350,000 more than 570,000. I can't remember the exact figures, but Labour still didn't raise over £1 million, so it still pales in comparison to the 5.7 million the Conservatives raised under Boris Johnson in 2019.
Exactly.
So there is, I think, it just shows the public have less of an appetite for the two major parties this campaign.
Yeah, which can be seen as valid, I suppose.
15th of
Yes,
June.
the 15th of June. Labour candidate and notable anti-trans activist Rosie Duffield withdraws from... Oh, yes, well done, Hayden. Rosie Duffield withdraws from local hustings events after claiming online abuse had been, quote-unquote, pursued with a new vigour, which receives backlash from locals. I don't know much about this, so I'll let you take it away.
So, Rosie Duffield, Labour candidate for Canterbury, withdrew from local husting events because she claimed she'd been the target of trolling and abuse online. Could she have appeared virtually? Yes. I know a lot of Canterbury residents online had complained that Rosie Duffield had not been very pertinent to local issues as of recent, more focusing on her anti-trans activism. Take for that what you will. Do your own research, form your own opinions. This is just what I have observed in my journalist capacities.
Yeah.
But alas, alack, any other points?
Naturally, my opinions are shaped due to her anti-trans nature. Other than that, I don't really care too much. Shall we move on?
16th of June, Reform candidate Grant St Clair Armstrong, yes, that's his real name, for North West Essex, resigns from the party after previous endorsements of the BNP are found on a blog he wrote, with him saying he, quote-unquote, bitterly regretted the comments. Any thoughts?
Not really. I'll be so honest. What is the BNP?
I do find it interesting that he...
Do you remind me what the BNP is? British National...
The British National...
Yes.
British National Party,
yes,
generally known for their far-right and generally considered extremist views.
That makes sense.
I do think it's interesting that he resigned. He was not forced out. He resigned under his own volition.
Yeah. Form an opinion as you will.
17th,
I have nothing more
yours.
to say on that. The 17th of June, Reform launches its contract, quote-unquote.
Basically, it's manifesto.
Yes. Interesting, seeing as it is a business. We will cover that later. And Lord Michael Cashman, a founder of Stonewall, is suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party after calling Rosie Duffield, quote-unquote, a frit or lazy. Is that what you intended to write?
Yes, that is what I intended to write.
I can't say I understand that, but we move on. Over her decision to withdraw from local hustings event.
Yes. Cashman was a Labour lord, now a cross-party lord. Over his comments, he withdrew them and apologised after receiving criticism. Notably, Lord Michael Cashman, founder of Stonewall, also did other things, was an EastEnders actor.
Interesting.
Research him if you want, but he's a very interesting man.
Yes, that's all I have to say on that. We move on to a really big, really important point for the 18th.
It is my pleasure to announce that the 18th of June had nothing special on.
Wow.
So we'll pass back to October
Yes,
for the
back
19th.
to me. The 19th of June. Labour candidate Andy Brown for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East is suspended as a Labour candidate for sharing pro-Russian material online, as well as downplaying anti-Semitism allegations within Labour, despite the suggestion that his Facebook account was hacked, and billionaire John Caldwell, who previously gave the Conservatives £500,000, I should really say, before the 2019 general election, says that he's backing Labour in an interview. How interesting.
The only thing I have to note is the Labour candidate story. Andy Brown for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East is the same constituency where Scottish Tory leader, or rather ex-Scottish Tory leader, Douglas Ross chose to stand. So it seems like everything's happening in that constituency. I have no other thoughts to share.
There was something with John Caldwell, but I'll be honest, that was an age away in terms of political time. Yeah, very interesting, most certainly. I move back to you, Hadyn, with another massive point.
I will make this quick. So, 20th of June, nothing special. I'm going to steal it from you. 21st of June, nothing special. Straight to the 22nd of June, the penultimate date we will cover. Under my research for this episode, Starmer accuses former Veterans Minister and Conservative candidate Johnny Mercer for Plymouth Moorview of being sad and desperate after he claimed his Labour rival, Fred Thomas, was boasting his military service and had never been in combat missions. 8 Reform candidates were found to have made inappropriate remarks on social media around topics such as the murdered Jo Cox, former Prime Minister Theresa May, and a black contestant on X Factor, and figures show that Labour raised nearly 15 times as much as the Tories in donations in the second week of the campaign, with Labour on 4.4 million and the Tories on 290,000. Any thoughts?
Reform, yes. There was a whole thing, I actually can't remember if this was more recent, so do forgive me if this came around in the past week or so. Their vetting company was not a vetting company.
Oh yes, the vetting scandal.
Yes.
We have not covered that previously, but this will be, I believe this comes up around this time. I don't know how that managed to fly under the radar in my research. But alas, the Reform UK, Nigel Farage claimed that the vetting company they hired to vet their candidates, standard political party procedure, had not and was going to pursue legal action, until it emerged that the company they hired, vetting.com, only provided a service for the party themselves to vet the candidates. Provided a license to software which allowed them to vet candidates as opposed to being a vetting service themselves.
Yes.
Take for that what
Indeed.
you will.
And some of the comments made by these 8 candidates are rather disgusting. I feel we don't have reason to repeat them for you, because let's just say they're unnecessary and quite offensive. But if you do wish to research them, they are freely available online. You will not be surprised with what you find based on our descriptions, but it's that way. Other than that, Labour fundraising. We've touched on that already.
We touched on that already. Interesting though how they picked up a much quicker pace than the Tories.
Shall we move on to our final day?
Yes.
Of current campaign.
Final day covered by our research.
Yes. We are making decent time. I think we will make this under an hour and a half. The 23rd of June. The Conservative Party's Chief Data Officer Nick Mason becomes the 4th senior Tory to be investigated by the Gambling Commission over bets placed on the election date. Scottish First Minister John Swinney says he's confident no public money was used on the SNP's election campaign after the party came under investigation for stamps bought on parliamentary expenses being passed on to candidates for campaigning events. And finally, Labour candidate Stella Creasy, I believe, Creasy, for Walthamstow, another word I cannot bloody pronounce, awful, says that she wasn't intimidated after a window... Excuse me, let me try that again. Says that she wasn't intimidated after the window and door of her office were smashed by vandals.
Any thoughts for this day? Well, of course, we have the continuation of
Gamblegate.
Gamblegate, which continues to this day. I believe a Labour MP was
Yes,
recently found
indeed.
to have betted against himself in the
Yeah,
election.
which
So,
I don't know how to feel on that.
put it this way, he was running in a Conservative safe seat. I wouldn't be surprised if he won that bet, but alas, he is under investigation.
Yes.
Any other points? Actually, on
go
the vandals, there's been a push by the Electoral Commission to end abuse and intimidation, but against electoral candidates, as it seems to be particularly prominent this
Yes,
election.
that does seem
So
to add up.
don't abuse or intimidate candidates. Let the
No.
democratic process happen.
Exactly.
I'm sure our listeners are much more lovely than to do that.
Yes, exactly. Well, that is about all I have to say on that.
That is the campaign so far.
Yes.
I hope you've enjoyed our first full episode of Co-Political. We have released a trailer. If you haven't listened to it already, listen to it because it gives some insight into our plans.
Yes.
And any final comments, October?
Once again,
First episode.
we hope you've enjoyed listening. Once again, go and follow our socials. I'll let you parrot that, Hayden, because I can't remember.
At copolitical_pod on Twitter and Instagram, at copolitical on TikTok, and you can also find us at copolitical.co.uk. That's copolitical.co.uk.
Yes, indeed. If you enjoyed this, please share with those you care about, those you think might want to listen. We will be back tomorrow.
Tomorrow. I wonder what we will cover.
I wonder. Well, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Stay safe,
Yes,
folks.
goodbye.
Enjoy the crazy world out there. Bye-bye.
Bye.